One of the finer ironies in storytelling is that storytellers struggle with verbal communication, but story dialogue is one of the most persnickety details of telling a story. Most of my conversations are with cats or the voices in my head as we decide which cheese we want in our omelet this week. So, when it comes to creating believable dialogue on the screen or page, the task becomes a little daunting. So, how do we get better at writing dialogue? Eavesdrop on strangers' conversations at the local playground until someone realizes we don't have a kid there? No, definitely not. That's how you get yourself on some very bad lists. Instead, I'm going to be going over 4 general tips for crafting dialogue and ways to implement them. Eventually, I'll make more specific dialogue videos, but I gotta milk each topic for all it's worth before I run out of ideas. So let's get started with tip number 1. Calm the hell down. Everyone gets all hot and bothered about dialogue, especially newbie writers, and that's not a jab at anyone, but it is necessary to recognize dialogue is not the end-all be-all of storytelling. It's not even the icing on the cake, it's the design of the icing on the cake. It can still deter someone from a story, but not as quickly as an unlikable character, a senseless plot, or some wonky world building. I want all of you to realize that your first draft is supposed to suck. So it stands to reason that your first draft of dialogue is going to suck like Kirby at a whorehouse. That's fine. The first draft is a kidney stone we need to pass before we can polish it up and apply the rest of the tips of dialogue to your writing. Which brings us nicely to our second rule. Dialogue should pretty much always have a purpose. Unlike real life, where 99% of what I say and hear is absolute filler, story dialogue has functions. Just as a short list, dialogue can directly tell us about another character, it can indirectly tell us about the character speaking, dialogue can tell us about the scene we are in, and it can tell us about what is going on in a scene. There are a crapload of ways we can configure dialogue to combine these functions or go deeper into a specific function. For example, the way a character talks about a scary house tells us both about the house and that character. Why we want to keep this in mind is partially so that we don't have empty words filling up our pages or screen time, but also so that our story is concise. And I don't mean concise like, Bobby loved Jolene, and he said, Jolene, I love you, and they got married, and the end. By concise, I mean the dialogue gets a lot of work done for the story so that we as writers don't have to say it. This is show don't tell on steroids because we aren't saying anything as narrators, but we're also not showing too much either. Instead, we are allowing a character's words to speak for them, or rather, to speak for us. Let's get you guys some examples. When Hagrid says,
Shouldn't have said that. No more questions.
we smile because Hagrid is a lovable oaf who talks more than he should and gets himself into trouble. But how Hagrid really functions in the story is as a clue pooper. Our heroes hit a dead end, they bring it up to Hagrid, and he accidentally tells the gang where to look next. When the Lich says,
You are strong, child, but I am beyond strength.
not only is this probably the coolest line in a kid show, but it tells us who and what the Lich is, what are Finn's chances of defeating him, and additionally, what is at stake if Finn fails. Finally, let me take a popular one. When Leia tells Han she loves him and he says,
I know.
we are reaffirming that Han is a badass, but also solidifying the type of relationship Han and Leia have. They might never talk to each other again. We don't know if Han is even going to survive. And his last words to the woman he loves are just, I know. But you might look at these examples and think, wow, this is super intricate and elaborate, and I'm never going to be able to come up with dialogue like that. But what I would like to stress to you is that almost any line of dialogue can be twisted in some way to appear significant. However, the reality is that not every word on your page is going to be critical or necessary. We just want to ensure that maybe around 80% of it should be there. And if that seems impossible, then wait until we get through point number 3. Great dialogue is not about having a character say the smartest, coolest, wittiest thing they could say. It's about having them say the smartest, coolest, wittiest thing that they would say, which is Gaelic for keep your character's voice consistent. Consistent character voice has a few implications. If your character is from 16th century Kentucky, then their dialect should reflect that. If he says y'all, then he says y'all all the time. But consistency is deeper than just the literal words spoken. If a character dodges an argument by making up words to confuse their opponent, This speaks volumes about their character, even though their actual words might not make sense. If a character does or doesn't know a word, then properly or improperly incorporates this word into their vocabulary, it says a lot about them. If a character mostly communicates with grunts and gestures, but then speaks on certain topics of conversation that they enjoy, it further characterizes them. A good example of dialogue used for characterization that is fresh in my mind is Oluo from Attack on Titan. His vocabulary is excessive, and he dresses similar to Captain Levi. These features of his character are consistent in that he is doing everything in his power to convey a sense of superiority. It functions to further nail down our character's personality, whether he is talking about food, the weather, or getting squished. See, having dialogue with purpose isn't super hard. You just need to pay attention when you make revisions as to who is saying what so that you can fine-tune what is said and how it is said. And that brings us to point number 4. Be careful with using a character to state a story's theme, give exposition, or deliver a monologue. Sometimes in stories, it is acceptable for the full character to give the most insightful nugget of knowledge to our hero. At times, this was Yoda, Jake the dog, or Patches O'Houlihan in their respective stories. Why they worked as the story's unexpected voice of reason was because these characters had the perspective and knowledge to give insight to our hero when the need arose. While they seem a little zany and unhinged, we understood that they could offer support that no other side character could. Let me emphasize that. Okay, here we go. And that no other side character could. Likewise, Oliver Wood teaching Quidditch to Harry Potter just makes sense. Here was a team captain explaining a sport that our hero had never heard of. It would have been weird if Hagrid explained the sport to Harry, because the poor guy couldn't even fit on a broom, and it would have been even weirder if Harry already knew how to play Quidditch. The context of the story makes sense for the dialogue to take place between these two characters. Finally, in Lord of the Rings, when Samwise gives the best pep talk in history, it makes sense. Sam is loyal and courageous to no end. He's like a hobbit golden retriever. When a disheartened Frodo asks why they're still fighting, sure, if Aragorn were around, he would say something about willpower in the face of evil with a capital E. If Gandalf were around, he would say something about strength against the darkness, capital D. But Sam is around, and so Sam gives a speech about how home and friendship are worth fighting for. He gives a monologue about what Sam knows best: a simple life, the Shire, his friends. And that intimacy of why he and Frodo are fighting seems so much grander than a world at war. Now, while those words would have still had weight from Gandalf or Aragorn, they mean the most from Sam, because he is the character most likely to speak of love and home, and he also has the greatest connection with Frodo. My overarching point here is that, at the end of the day, characters can say whatever you want them to say, rules be damned. But when all is said and done, if a character gives a monologue, or states a theme, or explains an idea, it should make 100% sense in accordance with who they are. I actually already did this rant in another video about how trombones can't sound like flutes or something of that nature. The point is that your side characters have a certain sound to them. They say certain things. They have specific perspectives. When you have them say something that goes against that perspective, your audience is going to know, and they're going to call you out for it. Gandalf shouldn't be giving me lessons on nihilism. Yoda shouldn't teach Luke how to pick up women. Hagrid could probably deliver a monologue, but I would want it to be a little meandering, slightly intoxicated, and make a lot of references to illegal creatures he shouldn't have. What a character talks about should be a reflection of who they are, what they value, how they feel in the moment, or the subject being discussed. It should stay consistent with their character while still conveying important information to our audience. Finally, it should carry weight. Not always a tremendous amount of weight or importance, but enough so that every time our character opens their mouth, we learn a little more about them, other characters, our story world, or what we're doing in it.
Now go sit in the corner and think about your life.
And write some of the blandest, most awful dialogue imaginable. Then revise it into a beautifully polished kidney stone. Also, leave a comment about other writing topics you want to learn about because I am slowly running out of ideas. Go team! The end.